are continuing on in our series on Esther. And the last time I was here, we covered part 1, where we learned what's happening in the kingdom. That there's this guy, King Xerxes, who likes to party, likes to drink, likes to get angry quickly and then make rash decisions. And that in his rash decision making, he got rid of his queen, who refused to come to his party. And then he made a command that all the young women who were beautiful in the kingdom needed to come and spend the night with him, and he liked them enough that they would be queen in her place. Well, that situation was taking place for 4 years before Esther finally became queen. And we talked about her resilience in overcoming not only her early childhood experiences and losing her parents, being raised by her uncle Mordecai, but also in just taking that situation that she was forced into and choosing to win favor with others and choosing to work hard and pursue the best outcome, because this has been going on for a while. And it's very likely that, if you're putting your calculated odds against that, not looking good in your favor. But as it turns out, King Xerxes likes not just beautiful women, but he likes beautiful women of character, right? So that was part 1. And we saw that when we set our eyes on God, no matter what situation we're thrust into, we can still overcome it, right? So that's what we learned from Esther. And so while we're still in the book of Esther today, we're going to spend a good chunk of time focusing on Mordecai, because Mordecai, he's a fascinating character. He's the kind of guy who lives quietly, goes to work, does his job, and he goes home and takes care of his family and his community. But as we're going to see here, Mordecai in his quiet life is about to be turned up on its head by this guy by the name of Haman. And what is going to happen to Mordecai, to Esther, and to God's people in the midst of all this? We're going to ask ourselves the question, how do we respond in situations like this? What do we do when we're thrust into situations that we don't want to be in? How can we, through our faith in God, address these situations, and what's our relationship look like to each other? So let's say a quick word of prayer as we get going. Lord, I want to thank you for today. I want to thank you that we are free to gather here, to sing your praises, to share your word, to talk about the things that you are doing in our life, and the things that we have overcome, and the things that are yet to come. Lord, help us to fix our eyes on you, no matter what the circumstances are, and to put our faith in you and trust you, and to see you and your kingdom come. Amen. So we're picking up in Esther chapter 2, verse 19. When the virgins were assembled a second time, Mordecai was sitting at the king's gate, which is where he works. But Esther had kept secret her family background and nationality, just as Mordecai had told her to do, for she continued to follow Mordecai's instructions, as she had done when he was bringing her up. During the time Mordecai was sitting at the king's gate, Bigtha and Teresh, 2 of the king's officers who guarded the doorway, became angry and conspired to assassinate King Xerxes. But Mordecai found out about the plot and told Queen Esther, who in turn reported it to the king, giving credit to Mordecai. And when the report was investigated and found to be true, the 2 officials were impaled on poles. And all this was recorded in the book of the annals in the presence of the king. So what do we see in that passage of scripture? We see that Mordecai has a job. We see that Mordecai is aware that his faith, his nationality, is not popular in the capital city of Susa, or in the citadel of Susa. Babylon's the capital city of the empire. And so Mordecai has this awareness that his faith is not popular. And so he says to Esther, let's keep it quiet. Don't let anybody know about who you are, where you come from. Just focus on the things that you can do and you can control. And as Mordecai is working his job and he's sitting at the gate, he hears rumors about what's happening. And, so often in life, I think when we hear rumors about things that are what's happening, we just walk away from it and go, nope, too hard. Don't want anything to do about it, right? Why do I want to get myself involved in that mess, right? And Mordecai is this quiet guy, doesn't want people to know his faith, but Mordecai is also a man who follows the law. And he says, you know what? Ad may not like King Xerxes. These guys may have legitimate gripes against him. He only robbed 127 provinces of all the beautiful young women over the past 4 years. People have reasons to be angry with the king. I'm sure there was other reasons as well, right? But Mordecai says, no, I need to tell someone about this. Even if it's not true, it needs to be investigated. So Mordecai tells Queen Esther, she tells the king, and the king has it investigated, and it's true. So what does the king do? He kills the people who cause problems, right? So we've got a brief picture of what justice looks like in the kingdom of King Xerxes, the Medes and the Persians, is that do what I say or you're dead, right? Or do what I say or you'll be exiled away from my presence. Harsh penalties, harsh justice in this kingdom. But one of the things I also find interesting is that we know that the king likes to party, and he likes to reward people, right? At least that's what's coming. And yet, I find it so interesting that in this case, there's no immediate reward for Mordecai. Sometimes in life we do the right thing and we want the reward, we want the recognition, but sometimes it just doesn't come. And we can take those moments and we can allow bitterness to seep into our heart. We can start circulating rumors about what's happening or who did what. But Mordecai just goes, no, I'm just going to go back to doing my job, doing the things that I should do. Yeah, it would have been good if I'd been recognized, but I'm going to keep going. I'm going to keep being faithful in my work, regardless whether or not I'm noticed or not. But he's about to be noticed, right? We know the story. Chapter 3. After these events, King Xerxes honored Haman, son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, elevating him and giving him a seat of honor, higher than that of all the nobles. All the royal officials at the king's gate knelt down and paid honor to Haman, for the king had commanded this concerning him. But Mordecai would not kneel down or pay him honor. So, in chapter 1, we saw that the king had 7 people that he turned to for wisdom. 7 people who understood the laws and the times and what should be done when someone breaks the laws. Well, now King Xerxes is like, 7 people, that's a lot. I've got this guy Haman, who he seems pretty smart. Let's make him over everybody else. So Haman is now number 1. And the king is so pleased with Haman that he issues this command that everyone, when Haman is passing through the king's gate where Mordecai works, needs to kneel and pay honor to Haman. So it'd be like every time you walk into work, everyone stops, gets out of their chairs, kneels down and bows down to you as you walk into the office. That'd be a bit weird, right? And I just want to dig into this word honor here because I think when we look at it in English, we're like, pay honor? Is that such a big deal? But when you look at how that word is particularly used across the Old Testament, it's used, it's occasionally translated as honor. It's like 40 more times translated as worship. So basically what the Babylonians or what's happening in this kingdom is that it's not just about recognizing Haman has a cool position and that, we need to stand up or do something when he's around. This is about worshiping Haman. Right? And that's a big no-no. And I was really curious because I'm like, I dug into this word and I'm like, so in the book of Daniel, what did they do? What's the word there? Because I'm like, it's not the same word. Well, the first 6 chapters of Daniel are in Aramaic. And so I'm like, all right, what's your word, honor, pay homage to? And it has that same connotation of, okay, occasionally translated as, honor or pay respect, but more often has to do with worship. So no matter what language you're looking at, we have a very clear picture of what men and what people in positions of power in this culture want. They want to be worshipped. And so here's Mordecai sitting at the gate. He's not going to kneel down, and he's not going to worship a man because he knows that, he knows the first commandment, you will have one God and worship him alone. So then the royal officials at the king's gate asked Mordecai, why do you disobey the king's command? And day after day, they spoke to him, but he refused to comply. So he's getting peer pressured. They're going, okay, maybe the first time we didn't notice. What are you doing? Okay, you realize who this is and how important this person is, and you work in the king's gate. It is your job. What happens if you stop following the law? What's going to happen? And day after day, they're pressuring him, going, look, you really need to be following this. And there are certainly times in our own lives where we get peer pressured to do things that we may or may not want to do. And I guess the question for us is the same question for Mordecai is, what do we understand about God and his law and how that applies to that situation? Because what I appreciate about Mordecai and we see with his raising of Esther and that overcoming of obstacles is that he understands that bad things happen in life, and that is okay. It's how we respond to those things that matters. And Mordecai draws strength from who God is in his raising of Esther, and he builds on that strength. And so he has that strength, and you're just wondering, okay, so what's your response to this, Mordecai? And we haven't seen anything yet, but the situation is going to get worse for him first. So therefore, Mordecai's not complying. Therefore, they told Haman about it to see whether Mordecai's behavior would be tolerated, for he had told them he was a Jew. So we don't get a direct response from Mordecai. We just get okay, why is he not doing this? It's because he's a Jew. It's because he serves this God that is not one of our gods. He serves a God that's different to ours. Haman, we've tried talking to him. He's not changing. What are you going to do about it? Because you're the one who's not being worshipped. You are the one who's not being honored. What was the problem that we saw with Queen Vashti's refusal? There would be no end to disrespect and discord across the kingdom, right? Blowing the problem way out of proportion. On a funnier side note, as we were driving here, my wife was looking at the Lake Macquarie website, and someone clearly had as an issue with a jet skier and said, why can't we just ban all jet skis on Lake Macquarie? There are plenty of people who own jet skis, own boats, and they go about their life and everything's fine. And you get a couple people who hoon around and make noise and do things that are really silly. So, let's just ban all jet skis, right? Because that'll solve the problem. No, it's a over-exaggerated response to, okay, I need to talk to this person and fix what they're doing, right? But we don't know anyone in the story who's going to blow this thing completely out of proportion. Or do we? Verse 5, when Haman saw that Mordecai would not kneel down or pay him honor, aka worship him, he was enraged. Yet having learned who Mordecai's people were, he scorned the idea of killing only Mordecai. He's not interested in dealing with the problem. He's going to deal with the person. He's going to deal with everybody. Instead, Haman looked for a way to destroy all Mordecai's people, the Jews, throughout the whole kingdom of Xerxes. 127 provinces stretching from Egypt on the left to India on the right. Haman is a proud man. And he's going, in his head, he's probably thinking, I have worked for this. I'm at the highest position of the kingdom. Everybody needs to treat me the way that I want to be treated. And isn't that an issue in our culture today? That we're not tolerant of people who don't treat us the way that we want to be treated? Sometimes we can take it too far and go, hey, you know what? I didn't like the way you treated me there. Let me talk to you about it. Sometimes we just get angry and, rah, and go back at them. Look at social media. You'll find plenty of examples of that. Someone says something someone doesn't like, they go raw back, and then there's comment after comment after comment after comment of people having to go at each other. It happens in real life too. Someone tries to address an issue, and they just end up in an argument, and there's no fixing it. Pride hurts, not just ourselves individually, but we can blow things greatly out of proportion. I think in the U.S. there's this famous example of two families, the Hatfields and the McCoys. I don't know if you've heard about them. So early stages of America, there was no legal justice system where they lived. There was a problem between a couple members of the family. No one could bring a resolution to it. So the solution was that they kept killing each other until one of the families was entirely wiped out. Yeah. Pride's an issue. We got to deal with it. Otherwise, bad things can come from it, because suddenly it snowballs and blows out of proportion, as we're about to see. So Haman is a proud man, but we're also about to learn that Haman's not just proud, but he's also a religious man. Look at this. In the 12th year of King Xerxes, in the first month, the month of Nisan, the pur, that is the lot, was cast in the presence of Haman to select a day and month. And the lot fell on the 12th month, the month of Adar. What's he doing here? So it is common in both the Old Testament and the New that if you're seeking the will of God or the gods, that you basically roll the dice for it. In the Old Testament, they had the Urim and the Thummim that they would cast to see, okay, who is it among the tribes that needs to do a task? Or think of Jonah as he was running away from his mission to Nineveh. Things got really bad on the boat, and the sailors cast the lots to figure out, hey, who has angered the gods? And the lots fell to Jonah. And they went, Jonah, tell us what you've done. This is something that religious people do when they're trying to come to a solution, whether that's a religion following our God or a religion following other gods. And I think it's really telling, because so often in society, when people talk about Christianity as the problem, there's also this religious mindset that can trap us. That when we say things have to happen a certain way along a certain line, that we, if it doesn't happen that way, we can get really upset. We can get really angry. And I would say that at times, when we put religion above people, that causes conflict. And now, I'm not certainly saying here that Mordecai's done the wrong thing because he really just needed to love his neighbor as himself, right? No, you need to put God first when you follow God. But there certainly was that backward pressure on him. There's a time when we put God first. And we need to look at the rules that we follow as we follow God and go, hey, is this really God's law? Is this really his way of doing things? Because we can easily fall into the trap of, well, this is just what I like, and it feeds my ego. So Haman's cast the lots. He sought the will of the gods, and the gods have said, you need to give him 11 months, right? And so here's Haman. He's proud, he's religious, and he's connected. Haman said to King Xerxes, there is a certain people dispersed among the peoples in all the provinces, all 127 of them, right? It's global. It's an empire-wide issue. Their customs are different from those of all other people, and they do not obey the king's laws. It is not in the king's best interest to tolerate them. If it pleases the king, let a decree be issued to destroy them, and I will give 10,000 talents of silver to the king's administrators for the royal treasury. So Haman's clever, right? He says it's not in the king's best interest to tolerate this problem. This problem is widespread. If we don't do something about it, we're going to have a really big issue. This is politicking at its best, isn't it? And you look at what he's saying, and you're like, well, has he really said anything that's untrue? I mean, it's not like he can just Google, 127 provinces where are all the Jews living, right? He can't do that. No one has those records in those days and age. So he's going, look, oh king, there's a problem, and It's not in your best interests. He's playing it softly because he wants what he wants, and he's got a very hard agenda, right? And he's like, oh, but don't you worry about it. Don't you pay into it. I'll cover the costs. I've got money. Don't worry about this. Just make the law, please, right? And so I sat and I thought about, okay, we've got 10,000 talents of silver. So not talents, sorry, 10,000 pieces of silver. Nope, sorry, does say talents. 10,000 talents of silver, the king's administration for the royal treasury. Basically, that's enough money to put more than 2 people in every single province across the kingdom, and then some. He's basically saying, you know what? I will see personally to this, that king, this is not a problem or an issue. He's taking the person in authority over him, and he's trying to blind him to the problem through flattery. And through going, oh, look, this just isn't going to bother you, despite the fact that I brought it to your attention. Right? Don't we know people who do that? They go, this isn't really that big of an issue, but here's what it is. And through the sweet talk and the smooth talk, they stir up and cause problems. So the king took his signet ring from his finger, and he gave it to Haman, son of Hammedatha the Agagite, the enemy of the Jews. Keep the money, the king said to Haman, and do with the people as you please. The king's like, you've got 10,000 talents of silver? What's that? We're friends. I got this. I'll foot the bill. Really? Pride on pride. So then, on the 13th day of the first month, the royal secretaries were summoned, and they wrote out in the script of each province, in the language of each people, all Haman's orders to the king's satraps, the governors of the various provinces, and the nobles of the various people. These were written in the name of King Xerxes himself, and sealed with his own ring. Dispatches were sent by couriers to all the king's provinces, with the orders to destroy, kill, and annihilate all the Jews, young, old, women, and children, on a single day, the 13th day of the 12th month, the month of Adar, and to plunder their goods. I'm just going to pause it there for a sec. He's plotting total annihilation. No mercy. Why? Because one guy refused to worship him. One guy. Completely blown out of proportion. And to plunder their goods. So it's not just, I'm going to kill all these people. He's like, no, I want all the people across the provinces to do this too, because there's an interest and something good for you out of it as well. You get to plunder whatever they have. So if you were jealous of your neighbor and what your neighbor had, if they were hardworking and quiet like Mordecai, well, you can just take it from them, right? And I will say that you look at European history over the past 100 years, and there are times that this happens, where people go, look, these people are the problem, we just need to get rid of them, and you know what, you can have everything that's theirs. Why? Because they got that through dishonest gain. They didn't do the right thing by it. Happened in Russia, it happened in Germany, it's happened in other places as well. And it can still happen today. So a copy of the text of the edict was made to be issued as a law in every province and made known to the people of every nationality so they would be ready for that day. And the couriers went out, spurred on by the king's command. And the edict was issued in the citadel of Susa. The king and Haman sat down to drink. But the city of Susa was bewildered. So the king and Haman make this incredibly harsh law, and then they sit down and have a toast to a quieter and more orderly, more respectful kingdom. Are you kidding me? It's so frustrating to watch this happen. And the most frustrating thing about it is that there's no legal recourse to stop this. These are the laws of the Medes and the Persians, right? Once a law has been made, you can't repeal it. There's no parliamentary system. There's no members of parliament. There's no Congress. There's no Supreme Court to challenge this. Our political system has its flaws, but at least we can stand up and we can oppose things that we don't like and we don't agree with. At least we have that voice if we choose to use it. But the city's bewildered. And so when Mordecai learned of all that had been done, he tore his clothes, put on sackcloth and ashes, and went out into the city, wailing loudly and bitterly. I find Mordecai's response incredibly different to how we in Western culture often respond to into laws that we don't agree with. In our culture, if there's something that we don't agree with, we put on sackcloth and ashes and go weeping and wailing loudly and bitterly. No, we get angry about it, right? We see angry articles in newspapers, angry people making podcasts, angry people on TV talking about how angry we are and how we need to do something about it. And yet anger does have its time and place. So don't mistake me on that. But God calls his people to a different response. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. God's people have a history of when news like this breaks, that they seek God. And they do that through mourning, through crying out about the oppression. I think of the Israelites in Egypt, when they were oppressed by the Egyptians, when their children were being killed. They cried out to God, and God heard them. And so he sent Moses, and Moses went to the burning bush, and then he did something about it, and he freed them from Egypt. When the people had been carried into exile, and they were sitting by the river Tibar, and they hung their guitars and their lyres and their musical instruments on the trees, and they wept, God sent Ezekiel with a vision of who he was. So when the people stop and they mourn and they take that time to go, Lord, this is not the way that it should be, God often responds with this great vision of who he is, even though it can take time to be developed and time for it to fully take place. And yet I would also say there's the challenge with that, because in the book of Esther, there is no vision of God. There is no prophet who arrives. There's just Mordecai and Esther who know who God is, and they are called into action. I think so often as people of faith, we want to see something miraculous and supernatural before we're willing and ready to take that step forward. Yeah. And while I don't have anything against the supernatural or the miraculous, sometimes there's just some common things that we can do to step forward. We can take the time to seek God, and that's often needed. And we'll see that Mordecai is doing that. But what about Esther? So let's get back to Esther. Mordecai wailing loudly and bitterly, but he only went as far as the king's gate, because no one clothed in sackcloth was allowed to enter it. And I just want to pause on that for a second. So Mordecai has disobeyed the command of the king, right? But yet here we see him following the law. When we go back to that earlier portion where he heard about what was happening, he went to the king. He went to Esther to report what was happening. He followed the law. Mordecai follows most of the laws of the citadel of Susa. He's not this rebellious spirit. He's not, running around telling people, don't do this, don't do that. He keeps quiet. But when it comes to following God, he knows he has to follow through on that. He won't step back from it, even though for years he's been able to live quietly and keep it on the down low. So he follows the law. He is not disrespectful to the king and to the king's commands, except for he was earlier, because it had that direct impact on his faith. In every province to which the edict and order of the king came, there was great mourning among the Jews, with fasting, weeping, and wailing. Many lay in sackcloth and ashes. When Esther's eunuchs and female attendants came and told her about Mordecai, she was in great distress. She sent clothes for him to put on instead of his sackcloth, but he would not accept them. Then Mordecai summoned Hathach, one of the king's eunuchs, assigned to attend her, and ordered him to find out what was troubling Mordecai and why. So I find it interesting that Esther, living in the king's palace, hasn't heard what's taking place. She just sees this great mourning and this great wailing, and so she goes, "Hey, I need to find out what's going on." You know, we too, when we hear about distress, we need to take a moment in time and go, "Hey, why are these people so upset?" You know, we can't just turn a blind ear or blind eye to it. God cares about the distress of the world. And when we see our friends, our family, our community in distress, we need to take that moment and go, "Hey, what's going on?" So Hathach went out to Mordecai in the open square of the city in front of the king's gate. Mordecai told him everything that had happened to him, including the exact amount of money Haman had promised to pay into the royal treasury for the destruction of the Jews. He also gave him a copy of the text of the edict for their annihilation, which had been published in Susa, to show to Esther and explain it to her. And he told him to instruct her to go into the king's presence, to beg for mercy, and plead with him for her people. I find it interesting that Mordecai's plan is not one of political intrigue. It's one of a simple plan of help us. And I find that, frankly, incredible, because so often, you know, we've seen a lot of political intrigue throughout the book of Esther so far. It's okay, well, how do we appease the king, get rid of Queen Vashti, and what do we float that on? Okay, well, how do we then get the king a new queen? What can we get out of it in the process? Because, okay, well, if someone becomes a concubine to the king, that's a higher social standing than, anywhere else in the kingdom. So, yeah, okay, this is good. Let's float that idea. Haman saying to the king, it's not in your best interest. These people don't follow our laws and our customs. I'll pay the money for it. Don't worry. Don't bother yourself. Don't look into this. There's a lot of people in this story who are very good at political intrigue. And Mordecai just comes across and says, no, we're not going to do that route. We're just going to simply state it like it is and beg for help, because only the king can make a difference. So Hathach went back and reported to Esther what Mordecai had said. Then she instructed him to say to Mordecai, all the king's officials and the people of the royal provinces know that for any man or woman who approaches the king in the inner court without being summoned, the king has but one law, that they may be put to death unless the king extends the gold scepter to them and spares their lives. But 30 days have passed since I was called to go to the king. So just a quick rewind. So this is happening in the 12th year of King Xerxes' reign, right? And it was in the 7th year of King Xerxes' reign that Esther became queen. So Esther's been queen for five years, sitting in the palace, not telling anyone who she is or what her faith is. She has not been able to practice her faith openly. And so we have this slight, small question. Esther, you've been sitting on the bench. You haven't been doing all the religious proper things that you should. Are you going to sit back and let this happen? I think one of the messages of this story is that it doesn't matter how long we've been sitting on the bench for. God still loves us, and God still calls us into action. It doesn't matter if we think we've been good enough or we've ticked enough religious boxes to be able to get to where we should be, that we're not special enough. There's no great grand vision of God here. There's no burning bush. There's just Esther and Mordecai, and he's saying, do something. And Esther's going, my marriage isn't going really great right now. This is not a good time to talk to my husband, right? He hasn't seen me in a month. I'm like, I can't think of a relationship that goes that period of time without seeing somebody or hearing from somebody that's actually doing well, right? And she's going, look, I don't know about this because, he seems to have forgotten about me. When Esther's words were reported back to Mordecai, he sent back this answer: "Do not think that because you are in the king's house, you alone of all the Jews will escape. For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place, but you and your father's family will perish. And who knows but that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this." I love Mordecai's response because he recognizes that, because in this response we see his rock-solid faith in that God has not forsaken his people. That even though there's a very scary law that has come into place across the 127 provinces, he still trusts that God will deliver the people. And I think so often in life when we're faced with problems or we're faced with political situations that we don't like, we go, oh, how can anything ever change? How do we even do something about it? And we use that as a reason not to take action. And yet we still need to do something, even if it's something small. But I also want to point out something very important at the end of what he says. "And who knows but that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this." Mordecai is essentially saying, Esther, you have been chosen for this time and for this period. He's leaving it a bit open. He's not really cranking the pressure on her here, but he's going, you have this opportunity. And I want to unpack what that means to the Jewish people, because the Jewish people understood that they were chosen by God, that God had picked them to be his people, to share his word. And so the concept of being chosen runs so deep through the Jewish people, and that the ultimate chosen one is the Messiah that is yet to come. Because we're 500 years before the Messiah in this passage of Scripture. And so Mordecai is pulling on that, going, Esther, remember who you are. Remember who we are as a people. We have overcome much. You stand in this lineage. It doesn't matter that you have been 5 years away from it. It doesn't matter where you sit. It doesn't matter that you're queen to a king who likes to party, likes to drink, likes women, and hasn't seen you in 30 days. God is bigger than this. You are someone who can do something about it, not just in a practical sense, but also in the spiritual sense of take courage. Take courage. You can do this. And so then Esther sends this reply to Mordecai. Go, gather together all the Jews who are in Susa, and fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. I and my attendants will fast as you do. And when this is done, I will go to the king, even though it is against the law. And if I perish, I perish. So Mordecai went away and carried out all of Esther's instructions. What I find really interesting about verse 17, Mordecai carrying out all of Esther's instructions, is that Mordecai has received instructions from Esther. And it's very clear in earlier parts of the passage that Esther is the one who followed Mordecai. And so suddenly we have this reversal of Mordecai is willing to accept the direction from Esther. She is no longer the child in this relationship. She is of equal standing. And Mordecai doesn't see her as, oh, well, you're really a woman, so, maybe I shouldn't listen to you. Because the Babylonians and Medes and Persians, they had that problem. Women are to do as they're ordered to do. And you're like, oh, geez, that's horrible. But Mordecai doesn't see it that way. Mordecai sees that he needs to follow the instructions of Esther. It wasn't just about him having control and influence over that situation. It was him recognizing that, hey, you know what? I need to do something as well. And Esther just has this way of getting people, winning favor with people to get them to do the things that she needs them to do. And I also love Esther's response. She calls the people together to a single purpose, to hunger and thirst for righteousness, to put that above even food or drink. She calls a fast. And she says, and pray, fast for me. Okay, it doesn't say pray, but I'm pretty sure they're praying too. Sometimes I check myself and I go, yep, I'm getting excited, and nope, let's check the Word of God. Nope, okay. We'll just make an assumption that's logical, right? Esther gets it. And she's willing to take that risk. If I perish, I perish. You know, she's standing in the way of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Look, King, you can tell us to worship this golden statue and that we need to bow down to it. And our God can save us. But if he doesn't, that's okay. What I love about Esther standing in that kind of faith is the recognition that God does answer prayer. God does listen to us. Tragedy also happens as well. We cannot stop everything. But God is still with us, and sometimes he shows up in the miraculous. And so part 3, if I ever get the opportunity to do it, is the miraculous end to the book of Esther, where we see how a Jewish girl who faced a lot of life adversity manages to change the heart of the king of a very massive empire, despite all the political intrigue and things that are thrown against her. I don't know about you, but that seems like a miracle in my book. And so my encouragement for us today is to think about Esther and Mordecai. That for most of us, we just want to live a quiet life, to go about our jobs, to be faithful in them, to follow the law. And yet sometimes, even though we seek to do that, sometimes we get called out. Sometimes we have to stand up for our faith and for what we believe in, even when it's really not popular. And rather than being consumed with anger and bitterness and trying to solve things through violence, we can seek God together. We can seek him in prayer. We can seek him in his word. We can seek him as fasting as a community together, as we see so prominent in this part of Esther. We're not going to do the sackcloth and ashes, okay? I don't think anybody really has sackcloth in their houses anymore. But here's the point. God transforms us, and God has a longing to transform this world. We just need to let ourselves be used by him. Amen. Let's pray. Lord, I want to thank you for your word and for your example. In the example of your people, Mordecai and Esther. I want to thank you that we as your people just want to see people blessed. We want to see law and order. But Lord, I thank you that we can lay our pride down. I thank you that when we build rules about you that aren't true, we can lay those down as well. Father, I'm grateful that it's not about our rule following, but it's about our relationship with you that changes us. That, Lord, even if we've been sitting on the bench for years, we can still be called into purpose, into action. I just pray that you give us the courage to do so. We ask this all in your name. Amen.